Chapter 10 is called Abraham and Covenant. So chapter 9 was focusing on Genesis 12, and chapter 10 looks more closely at Genesis 15 and 17, where God is making covenants with Abraham. And again, I try to tease out some more of the implications of the idea that God binds himself within time to promises that he's made, and the way that structures and rhythms time for Christians, which I think is almost impossible to overestimate the importance of that particular understanding of time. And I think it is a distinctive understanding of time that the Bible gives us. It's a time made sense of in terms of promise, not in terms of, entropy, or however time is made sense of in a materialistic universe. But the one thing I want to talk about in relation to this chapter is a distinction that I draw. Now, how do I put it? Let me have a look here. The logic of equivalence and the logic of superabundance. Okay, so these are terms that again come from Paul Ricoeur, and he is trying to make a distinction between a very calculated, measured approach to reality that's all sort of mathematically worked out, and a lavish, excessive approach to reality that he calls superabundance. And when he's writing about the Bible, he'd talk about the how much more sayings of Jesus and Paul, and he'll say that that's some sort of logic of superabundance. And I think those two terms are just really, really helpful for cultural critique, because they help us to make sense of a lot of aspects of the Bible, which I think is a constitutionally superabundance book. And again, David Bentley Hart is really insightful on this in The Beauty of the Infinite. But it also helps us to make sense, I think, of modern society, which is very viscerally, I think, a culture of equivalence. Everything is measured out, and everything is made into the equivalent of everything else. This is sort of Marx's idea of capital as the general equivalence. Everything can be measured in terms of this one universal equivalent value, which is money. William Kavanagh at one point says, rosary beads against boxing match tickets or something like that. Anything can be measured against anything else in terms of money. So that's your logic of equivalence. And the logic of equivalence is sort of the logic of contracts. I want to be very clear about how much I'm letting myself in for. I want to be clear about what compensation I get if things go wrong, and what conditions I can pull out. It's a very measured, controlled, and contained sense of the way that we navigate reality. And it's the paradigm of risk, isn't it? Everything's transmuted today into risk, and the way that risk is parceled out and shared in society. So that's sort of one sense of modern society. But God's covenants are not like that. There's no sort of back out clause. There's no sense of, I'm going to help you, Abraham, up to this point, but if you stuff things up, there's a point at which I'm going to back out. God is all in on his covenants in a superabundant way that ultimately, of course, leads to Jesus willingly dying on the cross. That is the extent of God's commitment to the covenants that he's made. And this idea of superabundance in the Bible, it's there in creation, the lavishness of creation, it's there all over in the Bible, orients Christians in reality, I think, in a distinctive and thrilling, sizzling way. That our universe and our God are fundamentally a universe of superabundance, not of equivalence, shapes our sense of what is possible in the world, our sense of ourselves, our delight in God, our sense of again, social change and the possibilities of culture and all sorts of different things, which I shall leave you to contemplate for yourself.